Today is February the 2nd. Have you ever heard the phrase, so-and-so fell into sin? I don't think that's a good phrase. Why? Let's find out together. Today we'll study Judges 2:10-19. So today we look at Judges chapter 2, verses 10-19. Let's jump right into that passage. After that generation died, another generation grew up who didn't acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things that he had done for Israel. Do you remember what we just read? Joshua had just died, and the author says that Israel followed the Lord while Joshua and those other leaders around Joshua lived. They remembered the mighty things that God had done. Now, that generation has passed away, and they have forgotten. Verse 11. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, and they served the images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them. They angered the Lord. They abandoned the Lord to serve Baal and the images of Ashtaroth. This made the Lord burn with anger against Israel. What the author of the book of Judges does is he begins to paint a picture of what's going on. And he does it by describing a cycle. In that cycle, Israel starts by abandoning God and serving the gods of the nations around them. As a result, the Lord becomes angry. This made the Lord burn with anger against Israel, so he handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to their enemies all around. They were no longer able to resist them. Every time Israel went out to battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be defeated, just as he had warned. Israel serves other gods. The Lord sends an oppressor to attack Israel. As a result, the people were in great distress. Now, as we get into the book of Judges, frequently the phrase, they cried out to the Lord, they prayed to the Lord, occurs. This happens next. And as a result of their prayers, as a result of them turning back to the Lord, to cry out to the Lord, verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Yet Israel didn't listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, he was with that judge, and he rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on his people who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Now, in this passage, we see that cycle that is actually repeated time and again in the book of Judges. Israel serves foreign gods. God sends an oppressor. Israel cries out. The Lord sends a judge. While the judge lives, things are okay. But at the end of that time, they go back to serving other gods. And the cycle begins all over again. There are 12 judges mentioned in the book of Judges. We have the story of 7 of them, 8 of them. But the cycle repeats time and time and time again. The second thing we see is that the cycle is a downward spiral. It's not just a repetition of events. It gets worse each time. We see that in verse 19. When the judge died, they behaved worse than those who had lived before them. We see that in the book of Judges. The first few judges that we have, there's nothing wrong with them at all. They are exemplary. They're wonderful examples. And then things start to go bad. Then problems begin to crop up, not only in Israel, but with each judge. As we get into the stories of the judges, we'll find out more about that. Now, what does this mean? At the beginning of today's broadcast, I mentioned that the phrase to fall into sin is out there, but I don't think that's a very accurate depiction of what happens. I've met very few people who fall into sin. They slide into sin. There is a downward spiral that takes place in their life. Generally, the sin that they commit is not a huge thing at the beginning, but a seemingly innocent thing. The man who succumbs to adultery typically doesn't go right out and find another woman with whom to cheat on his wife. Typically, it starts when his eyes linger a bit too long, when he thinks a little bit too much about someone else. Then the next step, he might say something. Then there's flirting. Then there's seemingly innocent touching. And it ends in adultery. That was not a fall. That was a slow, gradual slide. See, the problem with Israel is things got just a little bit worse, and that became the new normal. Then they got a little bit worse than that, and that became the new normal. Then worse than that, and by then, things were really going bad. So in our life, the important thing for us in order to live a pure life is to not let the slide even start. Whatever it is that you're tempted with today, pay attention to the small temptations. Those are the things that you have to conquer. They'll keep you from the big temptations. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe on the program that you listen to this broadcast on. If you liked it, share it with your friends. Have a question? Email me at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll talk a bit more about God's covenant with Israel. Tune in tomorrow and let's find out together what that covenant was all about.